Hello everyone. So in today's video we are going to discuss about the differences between TensorFlow, Keras and PyTorch. So if you have been following this series, you must have already learnt about TensorFlow or individually all three of these, and you must be knowing each advantages as well as the disadvantage. So we're going to talk about it from a more of a basic perspective where even if you're not from a technical background, it shouldn't be that difficult for you to understand. So firstly, what is machine learning? So machine learning is a growing technology that enables computers to learn automatically from data. So it uses various algorithms and it builds the models which help in making predictions based on the previous data. So it's as simple as predicting the weather maybe or predicting something based on just a given data. So when you make a computer do that, that is machine learning. Now deep learning is a much more a centered part or a concentrated part inside artificial intelligence. It teaches the computer to process data in a way which is inspired by the human brain. So basically it uses artificial neural networks, just like we have neural networks in our brain. So machine learning, if you want to represent it pictorially, so if you have an input, you have to manually do the feature extraction. The system will do classification for you and output will be given. Whereas in deep learning, you just have to give the input. Feature extraction will be done in by the model itself, by the neural network, and then classification as well, and then you get the output. So that is how machine learning and deep learning are different, or how deep learning is more enhanced. Now our main topic, the difference between these three. Now before going towards the differences or how one can be better than other, let's talk in short about each one of these. So what is Keras? Now Keras is an effective high level neural network application programming interface which is written in Python. So we just talked about what neural network is, which is nothing but a method in artificial intelligence which teaches the computers to process data. Just like the human brain, it tries to imitate the human brain. So this is an example of a neural network where you have an input layer, you have multiple hidden layers, and then you have an output layer. So you can also have one single hidden layer, then it will be a simple neural network, and when you have multiple ones it will be a complex one. So in each of these layers there are different kinds of calculations done from the data which is passed from the previous node. Now what is API or application programming interface? So it refers to any software which has a specific function or which acts like the middleman, where you send requests through API and then you get a response. It's something like, let's say if you want to get stock data on your Excel sheet, you're basically going to send an API request to some company which handles that data. So you cannot manually keep updating the stock market prices, right? If you want to maintain it on an Excel sheet, because it just fluctuates every second basically. So when you're trying to do something like that, you will just have to call an API, and some API which is public of course, and accessible for everyone. And when you send the request, it'll pass along the data from the stock market or for any other application. So yes, now this is a visual representation of API which you have seen in the earlier videos for the individual ones. But in case if you haven't seen them, I'll just explain it in short. So there is a user with a browser, like the example I gave when you want to have the stock market data. So let's say you are the user. Now you will send the request to the API. The API will then check with the backend system, validate your request, and probably if there is authorization required or if it is just public for, I mean accessible to everyone for the public, then it will get back the data that is required and send it as a response to the end user. Now during this whole time the end user does not know what is happening in the backend. It is just interacting with the API, which is the middleman. And if thought of an analogy in real life, the waiter would be like an API, or an analogy to API, where the customers who are in the restaurant will give the order to the waiter, who will then pass it on to the chef, and on preparation bring it back and deliver it to the customer. Now the customer do not know what is happening in the kitchen, who the chef is or anything. So they are just interacting with the waiter and they are getting what they want. So that is the analogy. Now moving on, what is PyTorch? So PyTorch is a relatively new deep learning framework and it is based on Torch. We'll see what Torch is. Uh, it is developed by Facebook's AI research group and was open sourced on GitHub in 2017. So again, GitHub we'll see in the upcoming slides. So it's used for natural language processing applications, just like Keras. So Torch is an open source machine learning library. Library basically where you have stored all the functions which can be reused or accessed by people for easier, or for saving your time. So it is a scientific computing framework and a scripting language. Now open source library, like I mentioned, so it denotes a software that is free to use or modify or publish without permission, and it has functionalities which you can use. So GitHub is a code hosting platform for version control and collaboration as well. Now it lets you and your teammates work together on projects from anywhere. You need not always be, physically in the same location. Coming on to the third one, that's TensorFlow. So TensorFlow is an end-to-end open source deep learning framework which is developed by Google, and it was released in 2015. So it is popular because of its documentation and the training support, as well as the scalable production and deployment option. So it also has multiple abstraction levels. We'll see about that. And it supports different platforms such as Android. Now scalable production basically means which can cope and perform under an expanding workload, which basically means it will only use the resources which are required at that point of the time, and if there is more traffic and if more people are using it at a time, so it will just expand the resources which are being used, and that's how it will cope up with the workload. Now software deployment is all of the activities that make a software system available for us, and abstraction is a way of hiding the details of a subsystem. Now to explain abstraction better, you can have an example of a car. Now everyone knows how to turn on a car. You either, like for the older version of the car, you put in the key and then you just twist it along with the clutch sometimes, and that's how you'll start the car. And the recent models of the car just have a single button. On the button press, it just starts. So you do not know what is going on in the engine. Also, you need not know it. If you want to drive a car, that all is not necessary. You just press a button and the car starts. So there is abstraction over here. There are hidden details that are being used but are not required for you to know what is happening exactly. So that is an example of abstraction. Now the difference. So let us see what is the difference between these three. Okay, so written in. So Keras is written in Python. PyTorch is written in Lua. TensorFlow in C++ and Python. So API level. Now API, we already saw what API is. So Keras has high API level. High API level, it basically means that it is fairly abstracted. That means there are various levels of abstraction, you can say, and it also means that it is more generic, also easy to use, but also limited in functionality. Now when it is more generic and if you want to modify it based on a specific given task, it is tougher. But if you just want to perform the basic functions, then it is more helpful and more time saving. So PyTorch has low API level, which basically means that it is much more detailed and specific and has low level of abstraction. So it allows finer control over application functions, which also kind of makes it a bit more complicated to use. And TensorFlow has both high and low API level. Now the architecture. So Keras has a simple and a readable architecture. So yes, and PyTorch has complex and unreadable architecture. Whereas TensorFlow, it is not that easy to read. So datasets. Keras usually works good on smaller datasets, whereas PyTorch and TensorFlow, both of these will be, working really good on larger datasets. Debugging. Now, we all know what debugging is when you are trying to, remove the errors and trying to test the certain functionalities of any software. And when you find an error, you basically want to remove it. So that is the process of debugging. So in Keras, debugging is not often needed. So that is because it has all the built-in methods which do extensive input validation checks. So it keeps on checking, and there is an extensive check. So it has various layers, and that's why debugging is not often needed. Whereas PyTorch, it has very good debugging capabilities. And TensorFlow, again, it is difficult to conduct debugging. Speed. So Keras is slow, PyTorch is fast, and TensorFlow is fast. Now Keras is slow basically because of its extensive validation. It is, you do not need to debug because it will help you in debugging, and that is one of the reason which makes it slow. Now, okay, TensorFlow is difficult to debug because of its symbolic execution. So it uses a graph mode, which is also known as symbolic execution, and it basically tries to boost the performance of the training session. So when you are trying to boost something, obviously there has to be compromise over something else. So in this case, it limits the ability to freely read the tensors in the graphs, and which is really important for debugging. So that is why it is difficult in TensorFlow, but that also makes it fast. So again, the pros and cons. Now popularity. So Keras is most widely used and is the most popular one as of now, and TensorFlow is the second most popular, and PyTorch is the third most. Now it all depends upon what kind of functionality or what kind of feature you prefer the most. Sometimes people want speed, sometimes people want automated debugging where you do not have to spend much time in debugging, or some people might want to debug it themselves because that's what they enjoy doing, or that's what they are probably good at or want to learn about. So again, all of these are very good. All of these are having different pros and of course different cons. So based on what advantage is more beneficial to you, you can decide what to use. But like I said, Keras is the most popular one, followed by TensorFlow and then PyTorch. So that's it from this video. Hope everything was clear, and hope you might be more interested to go in and learn about all these three or use them. And that's it. Yeah. Thank you.